The War Council chamber of the Galactic Dominion was filled with deep, guttural laughter. A massive circular holographic display hovered in the center, showing a live feed from the battlefield below. The towering warlords of the Kralax Imperium, each standing over 10 feet tall with thick, armored exoskeletons, watched with amusement as the newest species in the Dominion's military ranks. Humans were deployed onto the war-ravaged world of Typhon 9. Are these truly the creatures that call themselves warriors? Boomed General Varksar, his mandibles clicking in amusement. His battle-scarred armor glowed with the faint blue hue of his personal energy shield. Around him, other Kralax officers and Dominion generals chuckled. Some had placed bets on how long the humans would last. 5 minutes, maybe 10. They are so small, sneered Overlord Kruzur, a veteran commander who had crushed entire planetary rebellions. This is not a war. This is a culling. The holographic feed zoomed in, showing human dropships descending through the dense atmosphere of Typhon 9. The battlefield below was nothing short of a graveyard. Burning wreckage, crumbling structures, and the remains of countless fallen soldiers. The ground was littered with charred bodies of Dominion troops, slain by the relentless rebel forces that had taken over the planet. The Kralax had already suffered significant losses here, but they still refused to believe that these fragile-looking creatures could change anything. As the human troops landed, the laughter in the chamber grew louder. The Kralax soldiers, towering and monstrous, awaited them with plasma lances, energy cannons, and razor-sharp melee weapons. The rebels, another alien faction that had defied Dominion rule, hid in the ruined buildings, waiting to ambush the newcomers. The humans were surrounded, outnumbered, and technologically outclassed. The perfect slaughter, or so the Kralax thought. Observe closely, Varksar smirked, leaning forward in his massive throne-like chair. This will be over before our next meal. The first wave of human soldiers emerged from their drop pods. They were smaller, leaner, and lacked the imposing natural armor of the Kralax. Their weapons were compact and unremarkable, their numbers laughably low compared to the vast forces of the Dominion. Then, the Kralax forces attacked. The ground trembled as the monstrous warriors charged forward, plasma lances humming and energy cannons roaring. The air filled with the high-pitched scream of anti-gravity engines as Kralax war drones swarmed, targeting the tiny invaders. But something was wrong. The humans didn't react in fear. They didn't retreat. They didn't even try to fire immediately. Instead, they moved strategically, vanishing behind cover, disappearing into the shadows of the ruined buildings. Their formations were too precise, too disciplined, far different from the desperate last stands the Kralax had witnessed from other species. Then, the first explosion erupted. A Kralax war droid, an elite unit designed to crush infantry, suddenly spun out of control. Its targeting system glitched, its cannons misfired into its own ranks. The Kralax soldiers hesitated. What just happened? Then, a second explosion. A Kralax heavy gunner screamed as his exosuit short-circuited, his massive body collapsing as sparks erupted from his armor. What is this? Overlord Kruzur leaned forward, his laughter fading. The holographic display flickered, shifting to heat signatures. And that's when the warlords realized their mistake. The humans weren't fighting like traditional soldiers. They were using tactics the Kralax had never encountered before. Their armor wasn't just for protection. It was designed for speed, for stealth, for hacking into enemy systems. Their weapons weren't just basic firearms. They fired electromagnetic pulses that disabled shields and scrambled targeting computers. The battlefield descended into chaos. The Kralax officers in the War Council watched, disbelief replacing their amusement. The towering Kralax warriors who had charged in so confidently were now struggling, flailing, and falling. One by one. They are disrupting our systems. A Kralax technician in the council chamber shouted, frantically analyzing the battlefield data. They are hacking our weapons mid-battle. More and more Kralax soldiers began dropping. Some clutched their throats, gasping for air. The oxygen in their exosuits had been hacked and depleted. Others tried to fire their energy rifles, only to have them explode in their hands. The Kralax war drones that had been deployed to support their forces suddenly turned on their own troops, gunning them down without mercy. "This is impossible," Varksar snarled, slamming his fist into the armrest of his throne. On the battlefield, human soldiers moved like ghosts. Some shimmered out of existence, their cloaking technology activating just before a Kralax warrior could strike. Others appeared from unexpected angles, placing detonation charges in the perfect spots. The Kralax, for the first time, were on the defensive. And then came the final moment that silenced the War Council. A Kralax commander, bloodied and battered, activated his distress signal, his voice desperate. "We need reinforcements, the humans." His transmission cut out mid-sentence. On the holographic feed, the warlords watched in horror as a human soldier appeared behind the commander, a glowing plasma knife in his hand. The human leaned in close, speaking directly into the Kralax's comm system before driving the blade through his skull. "You should have taken us seriously." Silence filled the War Council chamber. For the first time, the Kralax warlords weren't laughing. Their tiny army had just turned the battlefield into a hunting ground. The War Council chamber, once filled with laughter, was now deathly silent. The Kralax warlords, their massive frames tense, stared at the holographic battlefield in disbelief. The tiny army they had mocked was winning. The Kralax forces, once so confident, were breaking apart. General Varksar's mandibles twitched with rage. His claws dug into the armrests of his throne as he watched his elite warriors fall like insects. This wasn't possible. Humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be crushed within minutes. Instead, they had turned the battlefield into a death trap for the Kralax. A Kralax officer in the chamber hesitated before speaking. "Sir, we've lost 40% of our ground forces. They're cutting through us faster than expected." Varksar's eyes flashed with fury. "Then send in the war beasts. Wipe them out." On the battlefield, massive containment pods crashed down, their metal casings bursting open with a hiss of steam. From inside, the Kralax war beasts emerged, towering, biomechanical monsters, their exoskeletons thick as tank armor, their clawed limbs capable of tearing through steel. The Kralax warlords leaned forward. Yes, this would end it. No species had ever survived the war beasts. They were designed to crush infantry, immune to standard weapons, built to hunt and exterminate without mercy. The war beasts charged forward, shaking the ground with every step. Human soldiers, so small in comparison, barely came up to their knees. This was it. The humans had played their tricks, but now they would be annihilated. But once again, something unexpected happened. The humans didn't run. Instead, they adapted. A Kralax war beast lunged, its massive claws swiping through the rubble, ready to tear a squad apart. But before it could strike, a pulse grenade exploded beneath it, sending a wave of electromagnetic energy rippling through its cybernetic systems. The war beast staggered, its targeting sensors blinking wildly. Then, before it could recover, 3 human soldiers leaped onto its back, their blades glowing hot with plasma. They didn't fight like soldiers. They'd fought like hunters. Within seconds, the first war beast collapsed, its limbs spasming as its nervous system overloaded. Another roared in fury, charging at a group of humans, only for a plasma charge to detonate beneath its skull, blasting its head clean off. The Kralax warlords watched in horrified silence as war beast after war beast fell. The impossible was happening. Varksar slammed his fist on the console. "This isn't war. This is an extermination." He turned to his fleet commanders. "Send in the Titan units. Burn that planet to ash." Far above the battlefield, the sky ignited with fire as Kralax Titan-class mechs dropped from orbit. These were walking fortresses, each one as tall as a skyscraper, armed with plasma cannons capable of vaporizing entire cities. No army had ever survived a Titan drop. The warlords exhaled in relief. The humans had put up a good fight, but now it was over. Nothing could stop the Titans, and yet something was still wrong. The humans, instead of retreating, began moving in strange patterns. It wasn't a retreat, it was a trap. The first Titan landed with a thunderous crash, its cannons charging to fire upon the human positions. But before it could, its systems flickered. The War Council watched in utter disbelief as the Titan's own weapons turned against itself, its cannons suddenly overheating and detonating. "What is happening?" one of the Kralax generals bellowed. A human tech specialist's voice crackled through an intercepted Kralax transmission. A calm, steady voice. "You rely too much on your machines. That's your weakness." The warlords watched as, one by one, their mighty Titans collapsed. Their targeting systems hijacked, their control signals scrambled, their shields failing. The Kralax didn't understand. How could humans, a species so young, so weak, be capable of hacking war machines in real time? How could they be so precise, so relentless? It wasn't strength that made the humans dangerous. It was their adaptability. Varkexar rose from his throne, breathing heavily. His mind raced. If they didn't stop the humans now, the Kralax Imperium itself could be at risk. He turned to his officers. "Prepare the fleet for planetary bombardment. We're erasing that battlefield from existence." The room was quiet. No one was laughing anymore. The sky above Typhon 9 burned as the Kralax Titan-class war machines rained down from orbit, their massive thrusters sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Each one hit the ground like a meteor, crushing ruins beneath their enormous metal frames. The humans had turned the tide, but now the Kralax were unleashing their true weapons of war. These weren't just mechs. They were walking fortresses, each standing over 100 feet tall, armed with planetary-grade plasma cannons, missile pods, and anti-air defenses powerful enough to shred entire fleets. Their armor was thick enough to withstand orbital bombardment, their targeting systems guided by advanced AI, making them immune to the usual tactics of war. Varkexar, watching from the War Council chamber, exhaled in satisfaction as the first Titan's weapons came online. "Enough games," he growled. "Wipe them out." The Titans moved as one, their massive cannons whining as they powered up, targeting the human forces below. Their shields flared, forming an impenetrable barrier around them. The humans had fought well, but this was the end. And then the first shot fired. A blue-white beam of energy tore through the battlefield, annihilating an entire city block in seconds. The explosion sent a shockwave across the ruins, toppling buildings and vaporizing anything caught in its path. The Kralax warlords watched with satisfaction as human signals began vanishing from their scanners. The Titan counterattack had begun, but something was wrong. The warlords expected panic. They expected desperation, for the humans to run, to scatter, to make mistakes. But as the Titans marched forward, something unexpected happened. The humans didn't break. Instead, they vanished. The Kralax officers frowned as the battlefield's heat signatures flickered. Human soldiers who had been out in the open were suddenly gone from the scanners, their signals disappearing as if they had never existed. Where did they go? Krozuriist, his claws tapping nervously against the console. Then the first Titan staggered. A small explosion erupted at the back of its left knee joint, causing the massive machine to lurch forward. Its balance faltered for a second. Only a second. But that was all the humans needed. The warlord zoomed in on the feed, trying to understand what had happened. That's when they saw it. Humans were on the Titans. They weren't attacking from the ground. They had climbed onto the Titans themselves, moving like ghosts, using grappling devices and cloaking suits to stay hidden. No alarms had triggered. No warnings had been sent. And now, they were planting explosives in the weak points of the Titan's armor. Varkexar's mandibles clicked in frustration. "They're like parasites." He snarled. "Shake them off." Activate anti-personnel defenses. But before the Titans could respond, the second explosion hit. This time, it was one of the Titans' weapon cores. A human engineer, armed with nothing more than a hacking device, had infiltrated the main energy grid, overloading the Titan's cooling systems. Within seconds, the Titan's reactor detonated, sending a fireball into the sky. The Kralax warlords recoiled as the first Titan collapsed, its enormous frame crashing into the ruins below, sending out a shockwave of debris and dust. "Impossible," one of the generals roared. But it was only the beginning. More Titans staggered. Some misfired their own weapons. Their targeting systems scrambled. Others froze in place, their AI struggling against human override commands. The Kralax had never fought an enemy like this. Most species panicked in the face of Titans. Most armies tried to fight them head-on and were obliterated. But humans weren't fighting a battle. They were hunting. One Titan desperately swung its massive arm, trying to swat the humans off its frame. But as soon as it moved, an explosion went off at its shoulder joint, sending the entire limb crashing down. The Kralax warlords could only watch in horror. The unstoppable Titans, the pride of the Dominion's military, were being taken apart piece by piece. "They are using our own technology against us," an officer whispered, voice hollow. Varkixar felt something deep in his chest, a feeling he had never experienced before. Fear. He gritted his teeth and turned to his command team. "Enough of this. Flatten the battlefield. Full orbital bombardment. Now." The Kralax fleet, still hovering in the planet's upper atmosphere, received the command. Thousands of cannons rotated downward, their targeting systems locking onto every human position. The warlords had lost enough warriors, enough war machines. Now they would turn the entire battlefield into glass. A countdown began. 10 seconds to fire. 9. The warlords watched, waiting for the final strike. 8. The humans had been formidable, but this was absolute destruction. Nothing could survive a full orbital barrage. 7. Varkixar exhaled. It was finally over. 6. Then the Kralax fleet's alarms started blaring. Incoming enemy signal. Varkixar froze. What? From where? 5. The warlords turned to the main holographic screen. A new fleet had appeared. Not Kralax, not Dominion. It was human. 4. A stealth fleet had emerged from behind the planet's largest moon, their ships dark, sleek, and undetectable until now. The humans had waited until the Kralax fleet was distracted. 3. Suddenly, the Kralax ships lost control. Their weapon systems malfunctioned. Their shields flickered. Humans had hacked their entire fleet before they had even realized they were under attack. 2. A single transmission echoed through the War Council chamber, sent from the human flagship. A calm, quiet voice. "You should have killed us when you had the chance." 1. The human fleet opened fire. The Kralax warlords stood frozen, their eyes locked onto the holographic display in front of them. Their mighty Titan war machines were falling, not to some superior force, but to a species they had laughed at. The battlefield was turning into a graveyard for the Kralax army, and the once invincible war machines were being dismantled by mere humans. General Varkixar's mandibles twitched, his claws tapping against the cold metal armrest of his war throne. His warriors were dying, his Titans were burning, and his pride was shattering with every human victory. "This is unacceptable," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. The other warlords, once so confident, now exchanged uneasy glances. The humans weren't fighting like any enemy they had ever faced. They weren't relying on brute strength. They were using strategy, precision, and relentless adaptability. Varkixar slammed his fist onto the control panel. "No more tricks. No more games. We will bury them all." The room fell silent as his words sank in. Then he gave the order. "Begin full orbital bombardment." Every officer in the command center stiffened. This was a final measure, something the Kralax only did when an enemy force was too stubborn to die the proper way. Across the fleet, thousands of planetary cannons shifted, their massive barrels tilting downward. Missile silos unlocked, warheads primed for launch. Cruisers aligned their ion beam weapons, adjusting their aim to turn the battlefield below into nothing more than molten rock and ashes. The countdown began. 10 seconds. On the battlefield, the human soldiers saw the sky glow red as the first orbital targeting lasers flickered to life. They knew what was coming. The Kralax were done fighting them head-on. Now they were about to wipe the entire region from existence. 9. Captain Elias Drake, commander of the Human Strike Force, gritted his teeth as he heard the warning alarms from his HUD. There was no way to survive a full bombardment. Their stealth tactics, their close combat strategies, none of it would matter when the entire surface was turned into fire and ash. 8. Drake opened a secure comms channel. "This is Drake. We are about to get wiped. All remaining forces, execute phase black. I repeat, phase black." There was no panic in his voice, no desperation, just certainty. 7. The warlords sneered as they watched the human forces scrambling below. Some of them ran for cover, others tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to run. No bunker, no cave, no shield could withstand a full Kralax bombardment. 6. And yet, something was wrong. The warlords expected humans to panic. They expected pleas for surrender, distress signals, desperate final stands. But instead, the humans moved with precision. They were retreating in formation, vanishing into pre-planned escape routes. 5. Why aren't they surrendering? One of the Kralax officers muttered. Varkexar didn't care. It doesn't matter. They will all be ash in seconds. 4. Then, the Kralax fleet's alarms blared. Warning. Massive energy surge detected behind the fleet. Varktar's head snapped toward the main sensor feed. A new energy signature had appeared, massive in scale. It wasn't Kralax. It wasn't Dominion. It was human. 3. A human stealth fleet decloaked behind the Kralax armada, their ships already in attack formation. They had been waiting, hidden, their engines running cold, avoiding detection. And now, with the Kralax's planetary weapons locked onto the battlefield below, they were wide open for attack. 2. What is this? Varktar roared. His fleet should have seen this coming. There should have been scouts, sensors, warnings, but there was nothing. Because the humans had jammed their long-range scans before the battle even began. Because they had planned for this. 1. The human fleet opened fire. The first Kralax battlecruiser exploded, torn apart by a salvo of high-energy railgun slugs. Missile swarms overwhelmed the shields of 3 more ships, turning them into burning wrecks in seconds. The Kralax command vessel shuddered as its systems flickered and died. The humans had hacked their main reactor, sending it into a meltdown. 0. The Kralax orbital bombardment never came. Their mighty fleet, the most powerful warships in the sector, were now under siege. Their cannons, meant for planetary destruction, were useless against the swarming human attack ships. The warlords watched in horror as their once unstoppable fleet was torn apart from within. The humans hadn't been trying to win the battle below. They had been setting a trap for the fleet above. Varkexar staggered back, his mandibles trembling. He had underestimated them. Everyone had. The warlords had mocked the humans. Now, they were watching them rewrite the rules of war. The humans weren't just fighters. They were hunters, and the Kralax had just become their prey. Varkexar stood in the heart of the Kralax command ship, his claws digging into the metal railing as the reality of his situation sank in. His once mighty fleet was burning. The battlecruisers, the titans, the unstoppable war machines of his people, all crumbling. And the humans, they weren't just surviving. They were winning. Alarms screamed through the bridge. Warning lights flashed red. Officers scrambled at their stations, desperate to regain control of a battle that had already slipped from their grasp. Human strike teams have boarded the lower decks. One officer shouted. Engineering is compromised. Reactor stability failing. Another voice called out. Rear defense grid is offline. We have no escape. Varkexar bared his fangs, his mandibles clicking in fury. He had never known fear before. Not until now. The humans had played them from the very beginning. The battle on the surface, the fall of the Titans, it had all been a distraction. A trap designed to pull the Kralax fleet into an unwinnable fight. And now, the hunters had become the hunted. He turned sharply to his warriors. Seal the bridge. Prepare for ground combat. But, General, one officer began. Varkexar grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against the console, his claws tightening. His voice was a deadly growl. They will come for us, he hissed. And when they do, we will show them why the Kralax have ruled the stars for 1,000 years. The officer choked but nodded. Varkexar released him and turned toward the center of the bridge, where a massive holographic map displayed the wreckage of the fleet. More human ships were closing in, their weapons charging for the final assault. But Varkexar wasn't done yet. He activated the ship's core command systems, locking all external doors. No one was getting in or out unless he allowed it. If he was to fall, he would do so in blood and fire. The floor rumbled beneath his feet. Explosions echoed from the lower decks. The humans had breached the hangar bay. They were coming for him. Varkexar reached for his warblade, an ancient Kralax weapon forged from black steel and plasma energy. It had ended 1,000 lives, and now it would taste human blood. The doors exploded inward. Smoke filled the bridge as human strike teams stormed in, their weapons raised. They moved with perfect coordination, their armor sleek, their helmets glowing with data feeds. And leading them was Captain Elias Drake, the man who had orchestrated the fall of the Kralax fleet. Drake locked eyes with Varkexar, his expression unreadable beneath his battle-scarred visor. The Kralax general bared his fangs in a twisted grin. You think this is over, human? His voice was low, taunting, daring Drake to make his move. Drake took a step forward, his rifle steady. It was over the moment you underestimated us. Varkexar lunged, a blur of razor-sharp claws and flashing steel. His warblade swung toward Drake's throat, but the human was faster. Drake dodged, twisting to the side as the blade barely missed him. The moment Varkexar's attack left an opening, Drake struck back, a precise shot from his sidearm, aimed directly at the Kralax's exposed side. But Varkexar had fought humans before. He twisted, deflecting the shot with his blade, then drove his foot forward, kicking Drake across the room. The captain hit the floor hard, rolling just as Varkexar pounced. The Kralax general's blade came down like a guillotine, but Drake blocked it with his forearm gauntlet, his suit's energy shield flaring as it absorbed the impact. Sparks flew between them, the force of the strike shaking the entire bridge. For a moment, the two warriors locked eyes, one a towering alien warlord, the other a human soldier who had dared to defy an empire. And then the fight truly began. Varkexar was a beast of pure strength, his attacks coming in rapid, brutal strikes meant to overpower and dismember. But Drake was faster, using precision and tactics to dodge, counter, and exploit every tiny opening in the Kralax's technique. The bridge became a war zone, their fight tearing through control panels and sending sparks raining down as they clashed again and again. Finally, Drake saw his moment. As Varkexar raised his blade for a final, crushing blow, Drake dropped low and fired a plasma round directly into the Kralax's knee. The shot connected. Varkexar roared in pain, staggering backward as his leg buckled beneath him. For the first time in his life, he had been wounded. Drake didn't hesitate. He moved in for the kill. A single, clean shot, right through the Kralax's heart. Varkexar stiffened, his massive frame shuddering as he stumbled back, clutching his chest. Green blood dripped between his fingers. He tried to speak, tried to curse the humans one last time. But the words never came. The mighty Kralax warlord collapsed, his body hitting the ground with a final, echoing thud. The bridge fell silent. The remaining Kralax officers dropped their weapons, surrendering as they watched their leader die before them. Drake exhaled, lowering his gun. He glanced at his soldiers, nodding once. It was over. The war against the Kralax had reached its final moment. The humans had done the impossible. They had won. The battlefield was silent. The towering Kralax war machines, once symbols of unstoppable power, were now nothing more than shattered wrecks. Fires burned across the wreckage of their fallen fleet, and the once proud warriors of the Kralax Empire lay broken, defeated, and standing among the destruction were the humans. They were bruised, bloodied, and outnumbered from the very start. They had been mocked, underestimated, seen as nothing more than an insignificant force, an army too small to matter. And yet, they had won. The last of the Kralax soldiers surrendered, dropping their weapons as the human forces moved in to secure the remains of the battlefield. They knew it was over. They had fought against many enemies, crushed entire civilizations beneath their feet, but never had they faced an enemy like this. The tiny army, the humans, the ones the Kralax had laughed at, had done the impossible. Captain Elias Drake stood in the center of the ruined Kralax command ship, his armor covered in dust and scorch marks. His rifle hung at his side, his breath slow and steady. He looked down at the lifeless body of Varkaxar, the Kralax warlord who had once commanded a fleet powerful enough to reduce planets to dust. Not anymore. Drake exhaled, activating his communicator. "This is Captain Drake," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an undeniable steel in his tone. "The enemy fleet has been neutralized. The battlefield is secure." A brief silence followed. Then, through the crackling static, a voice responded. "Copy that, Captain. Mission complete." Drake turned, surveying his soldiers. Some were tending to the wounded, others were checking their weapons, but they all carried the same expression: pride. They had done what no one had believed possible. They had stood against a force that should have crushed them. They had fought, not because they were the strongest, but because they refused to break. And that had made them unstoppable. News of the battle spread across the galaxy. At first, many refused to believe it. The Kralax Empire had ruled with fear for centuries. Their fleets had never known true defeat. But the truth could not be ignored. The stories spread like wildfire. Whispers became headlines. Reports became legends. The Kralax Empire falls. Humanity's greatest victory. The tiny army that stood against giants. Across the stars, other civilizations took notice. Some had feared the humans before, but now they respected them. Others had doubted them, seen them as weak. They no longer did. Because if a force as small as humanity's could stand against the mighty Kralax, then perhaps they weren't small at all. Perhaps they were the deadliest force the galaxy had ever seen. On Earth, the victory was celebrated like no other. People poured into the streets, cheering the names of the soldiers who had fought in the war. Children learned their stories. Statues were built in their honor. And among all the names, one legend stood out above the rest. They called them the Tiny Army, a name that had once been an insult, a joke whispered by the Kralax warlords as they mocked the humans. Now it was a name that would never be forgotten. Because they were small, but they had never been weak. And when the time came, when the galaxy turned against them, when they were outnumbered, outgunned, and standing on the edge of destruction, they had fought anyway, and they had won.